Dr. Åkerman. Welcome, welcome. You and I go back a long time. It was 30 years ago that you wrote a chapter on Christina of Sweden for my volume on the history of women philosophers. And 30 years later, now we're finally meeting in person, which is a delight. What made you fall in love with this amazing character, this amazing woman that you now devoted most of your academic life to researching and translating?
Yes, I've been spending 30 years working on her. And at first it was a difficult situation seeing what she was like, because she had been portrayed as an intellectual woman, but not in a positive light. You know, she was often criticized for being narcissistic, domineering, power interested, and people were not focusing on her real intellectual capacities. But it has to be said that she's a woman of the Baroque period, and she was becoming Queen of Sweden by force of nature. That is, her father, who died when she was 6 years old, had two other daughters who died when they were babies, and she was the third child, but a woman, and she then was the only heir to the throne, and she was actually brought up to be a king. You know, a woman who is brought up as a king has a training like all other young men, and been trained in hunting, shooting, also in judgment, making good judgments.
So she was brought up to be a king, not a queen.
King, yeah, this was the specific idea that they actually had. And in the coronation ceremony, she is crowned King of Sweden. It said, Kung av Sverige. And this is, of course, something that can be seen as being forced upon her. But she was handling this in a very interesting way. She brought in culture, she brought in learned men from abroad, among them Descartes, and to illuminate her rather poor and dark country, Sweden at the time, dominated by Lutheran orthodoxy, and in came a lot of intellectual people from France and Paris, mostly because it was the Fronde in Paris, which meant that people wanted to get away from Paris, not to get up into revolution. So they chose to come to Sweden, not only Descartes, but lots of other people from Germany, from the Dutch countries, and Italy and France. And all of these ideas somehow opened her up for the idea that there is something greater out there. Sweden, with its darkness in the winters, is not everything. They probably have also better food out there, larger orchestras and choirs, and so on and so forth. So she quietly decided to leave. And this was, as I'm going to show tomorrow, something that developed during about 10 years, from 1646, when she writes her first letters to Descartes, to finally entering Rome in 1656, 10 years later. So it's a long process with a lot of intrigue, and it has been a mystery why Descartes went there, and also why she abdicated. And all of these mysteries are being made plain after a while by me. And this is why I'm infatuated with her, because she has been like a big checkerboard or puzzle to figure out how really are the pieces going to fall. So my first impression was that she, like also my thesis advisor Dick Popkins said, she must have been much more interesting than she has been portrayed. She was probably much more of an intellectual because of all of these correspondences. You know, she cannot have been just this kind of narcissistic person who wants to have all light shine upon herself, which is the way she was portrayed, basically. So, well, it's been a long journey.
I want to ask you a question about a rumor that I heard.
Yeah.
And I don't know this at all, and I hope you'll set me straight. I was told that, of course, we all know the story that Descartes died in Stockholm, and the French blamed Christina for it, and demanded that his body be returned to France. and that she complied, returning his body but retaining the skull. Is this true? And
Well-
that the skull then resided in the Königsmuseum.
Well, it's true, but it's probably not at all her doing, because you see, he was a Catholic. He couldn't be buried within the churchyard. He was buried outside the wall, the church wall, which meant that there was a captain, I think his name was Israel Wassmann, who dug up the skull and placed it in his tavern, saying that this is the skull of Descartes. Now, there are two skulls of him. One which is this that rested in the tavern, and then another one. And I think the one in the Musée des Invalides actually is the one that was owned by this Wassmann. And so she had nothing to do with it. It was just that they had made the grave outside the wall so anybody could go there and dig.
There were two Descartes did not have two heads.
No.
So,
The other one, I'm not sure about its history, but it's apparently two
Okay.
skulls around. And you know, skulls of famous men were like a cult object,
yes.
like the geniuses.
Yes.
What would the skull look like? So,
I'm looking forward to learning for myself, and I'm sure everyone else in attendance is also, to learning more about Christina's views, her influence in philosophy, and in helping to mentor other philosophers, how her philosophy affected her personal life, who the other intellectuals of the period were that she was in contact with, and what their interactions were. Of all of those, which aspect of her life intrigues you the most?
Well, I think the lasting impression of her is that, in spite of abdicating, she actually preserved her sovereignty. She was called La Regina in Rome, and was considered to be a royalty, although she had formally denied being so. And this means that she had to recreate herself. I call my book The Phoenix Fire, after a medallion that she had with a phoenix bird burning on the ashes and then recreating herself. I think this is a symbol of her abdication, that she could somehow go away from the throne, lose her country, but also recreating a new situation as a patron of the arts and having an academy in Rome, which was very influential. So this somehow very interesting attempt not to be put into the shadows, so to speak, after an abdication where you have no power anymore, but have to recreate your position. She managed that, which is very impressive. So I think that this is really, and one wonders how much of Descartes' philosophy of the will actually influenced her in forming that personality, that intellect that made that possible.